The Hill Prince, the Mother Goose, and the Long Island? That can only mean one thing. It's Big A season. Let's handicap Aqueduct right here on NYRA Bets. Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with a Saturday Stakes preview of a trio of very competitive stakes races taking place at the Big A. That's right, we're dropping off the Belmont at and it's just the Big A, Aqueduct. And so this new meet has started off, and it starts off with a trio of fantastic stakes races. The Hill Prince, the Mother Goose, and the Long Island. We'll preview all three of these on this stakes preview. Now, before we do, I want to encourage you to press that like and subscribe button on NYRA Bets. We have a lot of great content. Even now that the Breeders' Cup is over, we're going to have a lot of content for you over the winter as well, getting you ready for the Gulfstream Park meet, getting you ready for the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks Trail for next year, having some of our own special top 5 awards, myself and my colleague Kaylee Shapiro. So listen, a lot of reasons to press that like and subscribe button today. All right. Well, like I said, it is a fantastic Saturday of stakes racing up at Aqueduct and really competitive fields. The 3 races, there's not a single in the group, in my opinion, and it makes it a lot of fun from a betting standpoint because I think you can really zig and go in some different directions. I'm gonna go through and just preview these 3 stakes races for you and talk a little bit about where I'm going to be going, some of my picks and analysis along the way. But listen, let's pick things off in the Hill Prince Stakes, Grade 3, going 1.125 miles on the turf. This is a field of 9, and it's a really interesting race because a horse that's going to jump off the page right away is Stars and Strides for trainer Bill Mott. The number 6 is a horse that really dazzled in debut, came from off the pace a little bit, and won with a really big Beyer speed figure up at Saratoga this summer, going 7 furlongs and earned that 92 on the dirt. But then the horse went next time out and didn't really run that well against Allowance Company. You could say maybe he didn't have the best trip that day, but it was a little further back than planned, certainly. But nevertheless, never really was able to get involved in the race. Mott then makes the switch to the turf. And the horse really perks up. It makes sense. American Pharaoh, the sire, always a good turf influence. And so when you see all of a sudden this horse goes and wins a $100,000 optional claimer and then comes back and wins the Saranac to close things out on that final weekend at Saratoga, 2 really nice back-to-back efforts, 84, 86 Beyer respectively. The horse has been training fantastically since then, got a little bit of time off, but it's come back with a 46-3 bullet on October 25th. So Mott clearly has this horse ready, and this horse appears to be very ready to go. Would not blame anyone going this direction for a top selection, winner of 3 out of 4, undefeated on the turf, and a horse that, like I said, really has not done much wrong, and is a horse that I think you're still trying to find the bottom of in a lot of ways. This was a $475,000 purchase, so there's some expectations here beyond just winning a listed stakes race like the Saranac. And I think that Beyer speed figure on the turf could continue to move forward. Still, we haven't seen the horse in a little over 2 months. Only has had 3 workouts since then. We'll see if the horse is 100% ready to go. I have a feeling this is a horse that's going to be going down to Gulfstream Park over the winter for Mott and running in some of those races that we see down in South Florida. But nice to get one more run up here in New York, but while we're still on the turf. Now, a horse that maybe I'm just a sucker for, but a horse that I really like is the number 1 Noble Confessor for trainer Todd Pletcher, Kendrick Carmouche aboard. This horse is a little one-paced. And I remember this horse was still a maiden and ran in that Pilgrim, which was grade 2, as a 2-year-old over a yielding turf course at Belmont at the Big A. And I remember standing next to Pletcher's assistants there at the time. And the horse finished second to Zulu Kingdom, who, of course, then went on to the Breeders' Cup. And I knew the 2 Pletcher assistants were kind of speaking to themselves and kind of debating whether or not this one should also go to the Breeders' Cup. Of course, he did, and he ran a pretty good 6th in the grand scheme of things. Was able to save ground and finished behind some really nice horses, obviously like Henri Matisse. It was a huge price that day. It was 29-1, but finished 6th out of a 12-horse field in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. And I thought that really spoke to just how much confidence Pletcher had in this horse, that he ran him in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf as still a maiden. Then comes back off a long layoff and runs against maiden competition, doesn't get the job done, then runs in the Pennine Ridge, which gets taken off the turf and finishes 4th in a 6-horse field, then finally goes to Saratoga and breaks its maiden. And Based upon that, then goes to the Nashville Derby. Well, you remember that. That was that loaded field with Wimbledon Hawkeye and Burnham Square and Hill Road and all these other Derby horses that went to switch over to the turf, like Sandman and others, because of that huge purse money at the Nashville Derby. Then, the horse runs sixth. It's Kentucky Downs. I'm always willing to give that horse an excuse. Then comes back up here for the Jockey Club Derby Invitational and runs second that day to Ashbury Park ahead of Hill Road. And the thing that I like about this horse and why I am kind of backing this horse a little bit and why I'm going to be including this horse in my tickets and might very well end up being my top pick, depending on how we come see it at post time, is the blinkers are coming on. I think this horse is just one paced. I think this horse needs the lead. And that's when you saw this horse win. It's maiden, its only race was in gate to wire fashion. You look at when this horse has run well. It's never really passed a lot of horses. Yes, you could look at that Pilgrim where the horse went from fifth to second, but was never far out of it. Was fifth by less than a length and finished a neck behind. Was never that far away. Has never really passed a lot of horses on the turf. And so, maybe made a mild rally here and there, but I think this horse is best up on the front. You have Kendrick, blinkers on, and not a lot of other speed in this race. I think Kendrick puts Noble Confessor out up front, and I think they might roll. And, certainly Stars and Strides has good early speed, but it really prefers to stalk the pace. I think the other concern that you would have is Griffin's Wharf, who also has good speed, but has not shown the desire to get to the front despite having good speed. So it's going to be interesting to see what Ricardo Santana Jr. does with that horse, particularly since Kendrick has the inside rail and will be able to get kind of that first turn maybe a little bit faster. Now, another horse that I am a sucker for that's in this race that I think is going to sit on a race at a big price is on the far outside is Tiz Dashing, the number 9. Tiz Dashing is a horse I was impressed by when the horse broke its maiden debut, I should say, at Belmont at the Big A last year. And horses run really well, finished second in the AWOD, and then you see a bunch of other really solid efforts, in my opinion. Even that Woodhaven, sixth but by a length. The Manila, third by a length behind Zulu Kingdom and Capitol Hill. And that was at a big price of 24-1. Then went to Saratoga and ran in the Hall of Fame, ran fourth that day behind. That was a whole mess of a race with Zulu Kingdom and Luther and Clever Again. And that was just a mess of a race. And Tiz Dashing was part of that going into that first turn. Then comes back and runs in the Gun Runner at Kentucky Downs. And now Tag brings this one back up to New York. Horse has always worked out well, so I'm not surprised to see that Bullet 5 furlong work on October 24th and always works well over the turf. I do think this horse sometimes runs its race in the mornings a little bit because you go back and look at this horse's work tab over the previous several months. You see some huge workouts on the turf. It doesn't always translate. I do wish they would put this horse maybe up on the lead as well, but from the far outside post, Javier Castellano up. It'll be interesting to see where they're positioned. The horse tends to sit more of a mid-pack trip, so I think that's where you're going to see Tiz Dashing go. But certainly another one to take pretty seriously just because of the amount of competition this one has faced previously. So Lil Volant for Graham Motion. Very nice horse coming out of the win in the Kent Stakes at Delaware Park. Why is that notable? Both Salil Volant and Thundering are two horses that I would encourage you to keep in mind. Why is that? Because they both ran well over a soft turf course last time out. And in the case of Thundering, is working out fantastically up at Woodbine leading up to this. 58-4, 5 furlong work over the Woodbine training track. So that's something to keep in mind. But that said, there is some rain in the forecast for Saturday morning. So it's possible the turf, I don't think there's any issue of going off turf, but even if the turf is a little soft, not that it's going to be rated as soft necessarily, but if it's a little softer, there's a little bit more give. I like to see horses that have excelled with give in the ground. And so winning over soft conditions and running well in the case of Thundering over soft conditions at Delaware Park definitely upgrades those two horses in my eyes based upon what I'm expecting the conditions to likely be on Saturday at Belmont, at Aqueduct. Now, if the rain doesn't come or if it's not as much as we expect it to be, and it's a firm turf course, then obviously take that with a grain of salt. Both of these horses have run well over firm turf courses before, so it's not disqualifying by any stretch, but just something to note. Also to note, Noble Confessor had that really nice run in the Pilgrim as a 2-year-old over a yielding turf course. So again, some ability to handle different types of going. I think that's pretty important in this particular spot. I think that obviously people are also going to look at Chad Brown's horse in this race, Mare of Midnight. Understandable, but is switching off Lasix. Does pick up Flavian Pratt, second back from a little bit of a freshening. Broke its maiden with Pratt aboard. One last time with Cancel up and a $50,000 optional claimer. Like I said, is switching off Lasix, but the pedigree is phenomenal. I mean, it's Loop de Vega out of a Galileo mare. So, there's not much you can say that is going to be negative about this horse. Has been running at that mile and 3/8. Now you're kind of cutting back a little bit. That is a little bit of an interesting dynamic because this horse comes from off the pace in longer races, let alone where this horse might be sitting in this particular race. Now, I do think that there's the potential for at least some pace in this race, although you say that in 2-turn turf races in New York, and then they go 51 seconds to the half, so we'll see. But I just will be a little concerned about Mare of Midnight switching off Lasix. I know Flavian Pratt coming off a historic Sunday at Aqueduct where he won 7 races on the card, which was an all-time record at Aqueduct. But I'm not sure if I love Mare of Midnight here. And also the price that you might end up having to take on this horse in this particular spot, because it's a Chad Brown and Flavian Pratt up, it may not equate to what you think this horse's chances are of winning this particular race. So for me, in the Hill Prince, I really like the number 1, Noble Confessor. I'm going to take a little bit of a chance with that horse. Stars and Strides is absolutely going to be included on my ticket. And then the duo of Thundering, Solo Volante, those two, Solo Volant, I'm going to be interested in those. Tiz Dashing might be a horse I have to write a breakup letter to. I've backed that horse a bunch of times. Maybe is no more than an underneath finisher. But like I said, I'm going to go with Noble Confessor as a little bit of a price over top of Stars and Strides in this particular race. Let's go to the Mother Goose. And this is a fun race as well for 3-year-old fillies going long on the dirt. I like this field. I like this field a lot. There's some nice horses in this field. You look at the number 9, Drexel Hill. Remember the last time we saw that horse was finishing second to Good Cheer in the Kentucky Oaks. Now that was 6 months ago, and now the horse draws a far outside post. My concern with Drexel Hill in this spot is she's likely to be a pretty short price. Yes, she won the Busher Invitational over this track back in March, but she feels like a filly that needs either a 1-turn race or very strong fractions. And in this particular race, I don't think she gets particularly strong fractions because there's really only 2 speed horses in the race, which is Lemon Zest and So There She Was. They raced against each other last time out at Remington Park, and they didn't exactly set the world on fire trying to set insane fractions that day. So I don't think these two are going to be going that fast. And as a result, Drexel Hill is not going to get the sort of pace that she needs to come from well off the pace. And she has the 6-month layoff to add into that. So she's a horse that's going to come running late because I think she always does. But I do think there's legit questions about how does she fire off the bench? How do these horses come back from a big race like the Kentucky Oaks when there's this long layoff afterwards? The far outside post, obviously needing to work her way over and save ground. It helps that she doesn't have much speed, so she could probably just duck in behind a lot of the field and go over to the rail under the ride of Ben Curtis. But Drexel Hill feels like a horse that is very beatable in this particular spot because of her running style, because of the pace setup in this particular race, because of the layoff, because of the post position. There's enough reasons there to make me go, I'd rather go in another direction. Now, where I ultimately went in this race, and you can read my analysis up on NYRA Bets, is I went to number 5, Philly Freedom. And maybe I'm a sucker for Philadelphia because that's where I grew up. And the song Philadelphia Freedom, written by Elton John, about the Indoor Professional Tennis League, if I'm not mistaken. That was Billie Jean King, was on the Philadelphia Freedom back in the day, and her good friend was Elton John, and that's why he wrote that song, The Philadelphia Freedom. Thank you to my dad for giving me this sort of, trivia that serves absolutely no purpose other than to make myself seem much older than I really am. Nevertheless, Philadelphia Freedom, Philly Freedom. The filly. She's sired by Constitution out of a Ghost Zapper mare. I like this Chad Brown horse. She is switching off Lasix, but what I like is she ran in debut against Ragtime. Now, that's a pretty serious horse for Bill Mott. Ragtime went on to nearly win the test stakes next time out, the grade 1. or she won an allowance race and then nearly won the test stakes in her next start after that. Then comes back and wins a grade 3 and then nearly won a grade 2 last time out. She's less than a length away from being a perfect 5 for 5 with 3 graded stakes races. So that's who Filly Freedom lost to in debut. Then she comes back and loses to Practical Love last time out, in July, I should say, at Saratoga. Then takes a little bit of a freshening from July to October, comes back and goes a mile, stretches out, and really blows away the field and tracks the pace, wins by over 8 lengths with Ricardo Santana Jr. aboard. I think the pedigree, the time, the continued stretch out is only going to benefit her. Because there's not a lot of pace in this race, I was trying to find a horse that I think can sit really close to that pace. I think Ricardo Santana Jr. has done very well up here in New York, and I think he's best when he's aggressive. And so I think Ricardo can put this horse right behind the pace of Lemon Zest. And so there she was, maybe even right next to those. So there she was, and really get first run, continue to stretch out. I'm a big fan of Filly Freedom. I think you get a little bit of a price on this one in this particular race. But let's talk about the 2 horses that will likely be up front here, Lemon Zest and So There She Was. We'll start with Lemon Zest, who finished second last time out in the Remington Park Oaks. It was her first time switching off Lasix, and it was notable that her buyer speed figure went down 5 points from an 80 to a 75. It was her first time going a mile and a 16th, and she faded. She fought on, and she held second, which was admirable, but nevertheless, she faded. And I think that might be a little bit of a concern as she continues to stretch out to a mile and an eighth now. This is, I would argue, better competition than what she faced in the Remington Park Oaks, and she's going a little bit of a longer distance. While she has good speed, she doesn't have the sort of speed where she has a massive advantage over the rest of the field. So there she was with Joel Rosario aboard for Doug O'Neill. That filly is going to be close, particularly because she's breaking from the 8 post. She's going to, Rosario is going to want to cross and clear a lot of horses. And so Rosario is going to make sure that he puts So There She Was in a really good spot and kind of in a tracking second position, just like she was last time out, going a mile and a 16th. Now, she's another one that's stretching out. She's going a mile and an eighth for the first time, and she's really been a sprinter most of her career. She was sprinting at 6, 6.5, 7. Then she went to a mile in the Torrey Pine and finished second, a very close second to Almond Joy, and did it at a big price, and then came back and won that Remington Park Oaks and won it in style, really won driving through the stretch there. So that was very impressive to see that kind of effort off Lasix, which, again, is a little bit of an issue for a lot of the horses in this race. Now, her speed figures are not overwhelming. The last 2 times out were her 2 best efforts, and that's notable that they're the 2 times she stretched out to a mile or longer, 83.79, but that doesn't hold a discernible advantage over anybody else in the field necessarily. I think she is the more serious of the 2 speed horses because she's already proven herself at a mile and a 16th and that she wasn't getting tired and she could go a little bit longer, I think. Doug O'Neill is not great up in New York in graded stakes races, 1 for 11 over the last 5 years, but people with a very short-term memory will remember the one was pretty recent. That was Raging Torrent in the net mile. So can win. More importantly, his horses, even if they don't win, they run pretty well in New York. 5 for 11 hitting the board in graded stakes races over the last 5 years. So his horses generally show up and run well. I think So There She Was will certainly run well also. I already touched on Drexel Hill. So let me talk about another one of the Chad Brown runners in this race, which is fully subscribed for Klarovich Stables. Now, this is a horse that really, I thought, ran exceptionally well last time, going the mile and an eighth distance. And that is a distinction in this field. Not many have gone the distance before, but ran the mile and an eighth and nearly got the job done, just couldn't quite close on points as points. And so ran an 88 buyer. What is notable is that was an effort on Lasix. So the first 2 efforts in this horse's career were 73 and a 77. Then suddenly you see the buyer increase to an 88, which coincides with Lasix. Now, it also coincides with going a mile and an eighth for the first time. So perhaps this filly, sired by Tiz the Law out of a Candy Ride mare, should love additional ground. Dylan Davis stays aboard. Should sit a pretty similar trip to the stablemate Filly Freedom. I think Filly Freedom probably has better early speed, and that's why I gave Filly Freedom a little bit of an edge over Fully Subscribed, but a Fully Subscribed, very good horse, I think is absolutely capable of sitting that very close tracking trip, making sure she's not too far away from the early pace and then being able to track them down. But I do give her a huge upgrade because she's run well, at least at this distance, even if she has not won yet. Now, one horse that I have not mentioned is our daydreaming girl. And this is a horse that finished third by a neck in the Cotillion, the grade 1 last time out. Listen, she's a cool filly for Lou Linder Jr. She's an Instagram out of an astrology mare. She costs $50,000. She's already won $235,000. That's a win in horse racing, okay? Very nice horse. A little bit of the same issue I have with Drexel Hill. Comes from off the pace, needs a little bit of a pace meltdown. And you look at those fractions she got in the Cotillion, she's not going to get those fractions on Saturday. She's not getting 110-2 to the 6 furlong mark. She's not getting 47-1 to the half mile mark. She's going to get something closer to 48-4, 111-4, 112-1. They're going to go slow. They're not going to go that fast because all you have to do is look at that Remington Park Oaks and Lemon Zest. Lemon Zest went 48-3, 113-1 to the 6 furlong. She was nursing it up front, and there's nobody else who's really going to press her in this race. Our daydreaming girl, she had that big Beyer speed figure, the 91 in the Cotillion. I'd expect a little bit more regression back to the mean here. Her other races, 71, 80. I think that's kind of what you would expect from her. So I'm willing to kind of try to get around her in this spot. Now, one filly that I do want to spend a second talking about is Queen Azteca. Do I think she's a win contender here? No. Do I think she's an X factor? Maybe. She is the horse that won the UAE Oaks and then ran 5th against the boys in the UAE Derby and then won her next start as well in Sweden and is just a really cool, very, very cool filly who's run against the boys a bunch. And then she came over here in the Alabama and she ran 5th by a huge distance, by 15 lengths. Was not really competitive and was kind of one-paced all the way around. But she stays over here in training. Now, Rudy Brissett takes over, and she's a filly that has a lot of American pedigree, even though she started her career in Norway and Sweden. Sired by Sharp Azteca out of a Palace Malice mare. And like I said, now is in Rudy Brissett's barn, has been training consistently over here, getting into a routine, working out nicely down at Keeneland. Now Rudy brings her up here with Jose Lezcano aboard. She's interesting. I'll be really interested to see how she runs, because if she runs like a competitive third, then she's a really cool filly to maybe keep track of next year. I want to see another effort before I put any sort of money on her in this particular spot. But she's a noteworthy horse because I'm interested to see how she runs, and I think she's going to attract a lot of eyeballs, at the very least, out of nothing more than curiosity and interest. But for me, I'm going to go with Philly Freedom up top. So there she was second, Drexel Hill third, and fully subscribed fourth. Now let's go to the Long Island and close things out here, which is the 10th race on the card. And this is another, you look at this field of 10. Now there's an AE and also 2 MTOs. Hopefully we don't have to worry about that in terms of the MTOs. But we're going a mile and 3/8 on the turf here. And I think if you look at the buyers, the horse that really stands out is Beach Bomb for Grand Motion. This is a horse that just has run so well in so many of these spots and likes this distance as well. Has hit the board, has hit the exacta 3 out of 5 times with a win, including in the very one, a graded stakes race down at Gulfstream Park. Ran really well last time up, but just lost to Village Voice. Now, Village Voice we saw run in the filly and mare turf just over this past weekend, and it was not competitive in that race at all. And it was kind of up on the pace and just tired, and it ran 12th ultimately, but didn't do much there. So maybe that race did not flatter her very much, but has run against some nice horses in the past. She Feels Pretty, Beleza, Moira, Stellify, Charlene's Dream, Spanish Eyes, Be Your Best. These are really nice fillies and mares that we're talking about. So Beach Bomb, certainly from a class standpoint, makes a lot of sense. From a buyer speed figure standpoint, makes a lot of sense. She does like to come from a little off the pace, but I think she is at her best when she is put up on the lead or very close to it, which is what we have seen in those 2 victories last year at Gulfstream Park and the very one in the Orchid. What did they do? They put her up on the front end. Last time she was closing from well off the pace. So she can do a little bit of both. But until she wins off the pace, I'm going to have questions because her only 2 wins in America are up on the lead. So, again, going to be interesting to see the tactics used by Javier Castellano here. A horse like No Show Sammy Joe for Graham, his other horse here. I love this horse, but I know she just won last time out in the All Along Stakes at Laurel, but she's not been moving in the right direction. She was in really good form when she nearly won this race last year with a 92 buyer with Flavian aboard and just lost to Be Your Best and probably ran the best race that day, was hooked really wide and made a huge run to Be Your Best, who was up on the front end, but just has not really followed that up as a 5-year-old and has not really moved forward. You have a pair of 85 buyers. She ran a non-competitive fourth in the Glens Falls. Her only other really good effort outside of that All Along Stakes, where she got a 78 buyer, was in a $100,000 optional claimer with Lasix. She also, didn't run particularly well in that Glens Falls, which was over yielding turf course. That is a bit concerning because there is going to be some moisture in the ground. So I do think she likes a firm turf course. A horse that runs well with a little bit of give in the ground is Grayosh for Chad Brown. I like this horse a lot in this race. It comes from a little further back, which than I would normally like in this particular spot, but I think stretching out could be a really good thing. I think you might see this horse a little bit more prominently placed, not necessarily in the lead, but maybe sitting second, third, fourth in that position, because this is a horse that traditionally runs a mile and a 16th, a mile 70, a mile and an eighth around that area. So we're stretching out a little bit more. There's probably going to be a little less pace early on. This horse has the ability to sit mid-pack in those races and should be a little bit more forward in this particular spot. So I like this one with Flavian Pratt up on the mount. I think Grayosh is a pretty serious threat in this particular race. And even though she's only 2 for 12, it feels like a hard horse to maybe leave off your tickets in that regard. Now, you look at a horse like Immenstitude for trainer Bill Mott. What do you do with this horse? This is a horse that won last time out in gate-to-wire fashion, but we're switching off Lasix, and we've not had really much success winning switching off Lasix. Another horse that's kind of a little bit allergic to getting her picture taken in the winner's circle. So I do worry about that, though once Mott gets her horse right, they usually stay right. And she's been running well with Junior the last few times out, but still switching off Lasix, she needs to replicate those buyers, and that's always been a little bit of an issue there. Interestingly enough, I actually like his other horse, Alluring Angel, maybe a little bit more with Kendrick aboard. This is a horse that finished third last time out in the Waya, going the mile and 3/8, and was able to come from off the pace. Maybe a little bit more of an underneath play here. Again, a horse that doesn't win very often. Last win was in June of 2024. So something to keep in mind here. Then you have some horses parked further outside. Chad Brown's Fun with Flags with Dylan Davis aboard on that 10 post. Way to be Marie, coming off a little bit of a freshening and a layoff since that Kentucky Downs effort for Rob Atras. That's a horse that always runs well. 10 for 14, lifetime in the money. I think you have to include a horse like Way to be Marie, at least in your vertical gimmicks for sure. Only 3 for 14 winning, though. So that is the issue, is that when you go through and look at this field, a lot of these horses just – they don't love winning all the time. And that's a little bit of an issue. I'm going to take a shot with Grayosh. I think this horse could be sitting on a nice effort with a little bit of stretching out. I like Flavian staying aboard in this particular spot. I like Chad wanting to place this one in this particular race. I just think maybe this horse could get competitive in this field and has success over turf with some give in it. So I think the conditions could line up for a horse like Grayosh as well. Obviously, Beach Bomb is going to be on my late pick 5 ticket. You'd be crazy to exclude this horse from your ticket. She's probably the closest thing to a single in this sequence of 3 stakes races, but I just don't necessarily love her if I don't know where she's sitting going into the first turn. If she's sitting further back, then I'm going to toss her chances. But if she's sitting more prominently, then I think she's obviously a very strong win contender. Final horse I'll mention is, I'm going to take a shot with this horse deeper underneath in like a try or a super, is Brock Nardini. Brock Nardini is a horse that was so stunning in debut. I remember when this horse debuted at Saratoga in 2023, and this horse put on a turn of foot you just don't see many people put on, particularly New York breds. And then won the Salima at Laurel over good turf, we should mention, but never really fulfilled the promise from that first race. Now has slowly and gradually gotten better for George Weaver, but is really coming from a little too far back. Now they put the blinkers on. Johnny V's up. I could see this horse surprising. I know Brock Nardini always takes a little too much money for my liking, even though the last couple of times out, I think you've got a more honest price on her. But she tends to take maybe a little more money than you like, than what her form would certainly indicate and what her buyers would indicate. People like this horse, and I'm one of those people. She's a New York bred. I know she hasn't, necessarily set the world on fire against Open Company, but there's a good race in her. I think the blinkers are going to very much so help. Palace Malice out of a Bernardini mare. George Weaver knows how to train turf horses. He knows how to train horses, period. Just won his first Breeders' Cup race over the weekend with Cy-Fair. Like I said, Johnny hopped back aboard, rode this one two back against Open Company. I just think Brock Nardini, a horse I'll be using maybe a little bit more underneath in this particular spot. All right, folks. Well, that will do it for this stakes preview. I will also have a capping the card for Saturday at Aqueduct, where I go through all 10 races, give you my top pick and my top value play. Never fear, myself and Kaylee Shapiro will be back with plenty of other content. So we're not, Kaylee, just because the Breeders' Cup over doesn't mean Kaylee's gone. Kaylee's going to keep coming back with content. She and I are going to do a lot of stuff, I think, with some of the maiden races that are coming up at Churchill Downs. We're going to have a lot of great content, getting you ready for the Kentucky Derby, Kentucky Oaks. So, folks, there's a lot of reasons to stay subscribed and continue to follow along with all of our great content here on NYRA Bets YouTube. For Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great, prosperous day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.